Hello and welcome to Books and Landscape, and my name is Amanda Davey, and I'm carrying on again now with some more of the South Downs churches associated themes. It's warm enough to be inside, it's warm enough to be on screen. Last weekend was a bit of a blip because it was so hot. And the house is finally cooling down, so that's nice. I did have in mind to do this one last weekend, but I've got screeds of notes and I've had to try and get it all sort of squished down. So, industry over the centuries in the vicinity of South Downs churches is today's topic. And it is a far more complicated topic than I had anticipated. So, to use on my notes would take a long time. The idea of industry in the South Downs, I'm sorry, it's a script, as they are now and within the national park is different to that of even 40 years ago. Some of them, like chalkpits and iron making, are known, but others are more nuanced and known mostly to historians or archaeologists because the evidence is buried or has been dug and put into big reports. I've attempted to sort them into more or less chronicle groups of topics, although most have had significant overlap in time, given that they've started early, carried on, developed, and sunk without trace in many respects. Industry, to be viable, like any business, requires a balance between availability of resources at a cost that can be recovered and demand that pays for the end result. Inevitably, this leads to problems if one of the three falters. Competition from international trade has long been one of the catalysts for decline, as has the loss of raw material or the running out thereof. So the first one is travertine or tufa. Never quite sure which it should be. While some industrial processes were done before the Romans, their impact on the church's environment was not intense, given that there were no churches until a couple of centuries after the Romans left. Many Roman buildings, however, were used as a source of quarry material. Travertine, or tufa, is a popular Italian building stone, and while they brought some in from distant quarries, local sources were preferred if available for logistical reasons. Former quarry sites have been identified at Duncton, near Burton Park, and Stenning, probably Peppercombe. Travertine is the result of precipitating calcium carbonate around springs that have dissolved the limestone on their way through the rock. It is found in the walls of Stenning and Burton Park churches, and the theory has it that Stenning's name, meaning place of special stone, might have been due to the soft turned hard in air rock. It can only date into the early medieval period, as for several reasons the water table then went too low for the deposits to form at economic levels, and it's very difficult to find any now. So, water-reliant industries. Salt. This was quite a surprise to me. Salt has long been treasured as it is key to the success of an omnivorous diet. In the centuries where local production was the most economically viable means to producing some for Britain, the salinity of seawater was the key. Sea levels rose in the 13th and 14th centuries, plus there were extra storms. What was needed was brine, sluggish seawater that had partially evaporated in the sun or the wind, or through actually boiling seawater in clay dishes. Then lead pans fired by wood as time went on. Then there was a move to washing salt impregnated sand and estuarine mud that had become brackish through evaporation. New coastal works were set up from the 1560s onwards, when French religious wars made life difficult, using coal-fired iron evaporation pans after the brine had been part evaporated in large shallow ponds. It was replaced by rock salt in the 17th century. when the mining of that took over. Botolphs on the River Ada once thrived on the local salt industry with a busy village and wharf. Bramber was an active port to the north, as was the competitive Stenning. Coombs also had a larger village next to the now almost as isolated church by 1350. The heyday had come to an end with the silting of the river reducing its traffic. Some local production carried on into the 16th century, but it was on a very much lesser scale. On the Ouse, there were 4 salt pans known at Piddinghoe in the 11th century, and Tarring Neville also had salt-making, shipbuilding and fishing at that time. Mills. Traditionally, mills were powered by wind or water, but as far as I can make out, industrial scale work happened with the wood-powered mills, some of which grew to significant size. I'm going to deal with the windy ones in a different thing on archaeology. The South Downs has some well-known rivers, all of which have supported watermills along their course. The River Itchen has Kingsworthy, has many. Kingsworthy had a sawmill, but the Winchester bypass has blocked access to the river. Smallish mills occurred along the length. The River Mearn mills included the one at Droxford to the north of the church, by some way north of the church, with a memorably long ford. It is driving through fords in a car is an uncomfortable business. When the Droxford Ford was open, that would have been quite stressful because it's about 100 metres long. The river remaining navigable in wet months probably helped the local smugglers. At Wickham, again on the Mearn, there is the Chesapeake Mill, which was built using timbers from HMS Chesapeake, which are riddled with shot from a battle in the American War of Independence. Once used for flour, it is now an antique centre, and we parked outside it when we went under the railway bridge to go and visit the church, which is a bit outside the town. The River Rother had a corn mill upstream of the church at Cocking on one of its tributaries, plus a flour mill at Selham. A string of watermills at Trotton, Chithurst, Iping and Stedham was dominated by the success of Iping Mill, which became a paper mill that may have supplied the paper for the Times newspaper after 1725. The church was rebuilt to accommodate the increased population in 1840, but by 1885 another rebuild took place to reduce capacity and the cost of upkeep, as by then the workforce had diminished. On the River Ouse there was another paper mill below St John sub Castro in Lewes, or just outside, just below Lewes. Interesting whether it's actually in the town or anyway, doesn't matter. Alright, fish and other water bits. Fishing on a small scale is something that is well known for rivers. The presence of Isaac Walton at Droxford is appointed to that, plus he fished on the River Itchen too. As an industry, I noted it mainly for Sussex, with the ancient track known as Jugs Lane at Kingston, used by Brighton fishwives to reach the market in Lewes. Further south at Piddinghoe and south-east there were once successful herring fisheries. A bit later, after a stint as a brickworks, upriver from the church, Piddinghoe supported a whiting works. There, chalk was spread on sloping shelves to dry, and the pulverised result was used variously in things like paint, putty, whitewash, toothpaste and ceramics. There is still a brick kiln in a private garden nearby. So ironworking is one of the key things that people think of to do with the Weald. I haven't actually put shipbuilding in. That didn't crop up as apart from roads going backwards and forwards past the churches. Ironworking. From Roman times, the Weald of Sussex in particular has been known for its iron industry, with the availability of the ore as well as the wood to feed the furnaces. It might have helped that what population there was reliant on this moosen work, which could have been more curtailed in denser populated areas where people would complain about the smells, the noises, the pollution, etc., etc. It is thought that Sutton could have been on a Roman iron route. It certainly was in the late boom years. Rowgate Church is on a key crossroads with an iron mill on the Rother at Habin and an iron furnace at Hartingcombe to the north. Ringmer's vicar from 1533 was Reverend William Lovell, born into an ironworking family who ended up inheriting the business and turning it into the 200 years of success with the muzzle-loader cannons that delighted Henry VIII. Shulbreed, North Chapel and Ebenhoe were all in the thick of iron country, with multiple evocative place names nearby. North Chapel also had Huguenot glassmakers from the 1560s until the end of the Napoleonic Wars brought a seismic shift in demand. By 1839, the charcoal factory at nearby Fisher Street had become a tannery making use of the oak bark and selling the wood. By 1551, the original Lynch Church by the Downs, to the south of the parish, was in ruins, but the northern pastures in the outlier had an increased population, and Mine Pit Copse, Furnace Pond and Iron Hill all explain why. When the iron industry foundered near Barlavington, the destroyed economy fostered smuggling, which employed rumours of witches and ghosts as an effective distraction. Bricks and pottery. A surge in demand for bricks with the expansion of cities in the 19th century led to many brickfields across the national park in the clay lands. Some brick church repairs date back to the years the rivers silted significantly enough to make the movement of stone difficult. In 1842, when road widening collapsed the east end of Corhampton Church, the repairs had to be in brick, which looks pretty odd. Swanmore Church was built as the result of brickfields nearby. Stroud was another new settlement linked to brickfields. The Mission Chapel started in 1896. Plumpton Church has been swamped by Plumpton College. It once had a nearby village, but that was destroyed by fire following pestilence, and then the later population, a little bit further away, slid north to the brickfields of Plumpton Plain and the beginnings of Plumpton Green from 1863. There is a salt lane at Boworth, but the church came in 1838 after gifts from Henry Joyce Mulcock, who owned the Shorley pottery, which made flour and chimney pots as well as bricks from the local clay. Opham grew as a village away from Hamsey when the local chalk pit and brick industry at Cooksbridge began to flourish using the Ouse navigation once that had reopened river trade. Earlier there had been a less obvious trade in pottery, but the evidence is largely buried. In 1972, a mid-13th century West Sussex ware pottery kiln was discovered under the south-west corner of Heyshott Church, providing good dating evidence as well as interest. And this pot was made from clay at Clayton, and when it came out of the ground, it was a sort of light sort of beige colour. So it's quite extraordinary that it is actually fired to be this rich red. And that's one of the brickfield areas. There was quite a big brickworks at Hassocks and Kemah. Other industries. Tanning has already been mentioned for North Chapel, but it must have been more widespread than I actually discovered when I was doing the churches research, focus on churches, given that it has reliance on oak bark in particular, which was a feature of the Weald woods. One thorny problem is that apparently the best season for felling trees for timber, is the worst for tanning and vice versa. So in order to, well, I don't know which way around it is. So I also found it connected to Sheet Church, which was built in 1868 on land that had been part of a tan yard, in spite of being close to the village 30 years previously. So tanning's quite smelly. Alfriston had a tannery, tallow and glove factory by the Napoleonic Wars, but as elsewhere the trade then fell off, opening things up to smuggling again. At Upham in Hampshire, The main local work was brush making, where hazel twigs are made into brooms that were then taken around to sell door to door. In Folkeington, I came across fuller's teasels growing in local fields in 1861. These are stronger, sharper teasels than the wild ones we see on the downs today, and were used in textiles to produce a finer surface. There must have been more fields as they were needed in areas in the wool areas. So to only find one is odd, given that the South Downs was very woolly. The main centre apparently for the teasels was in Somerset, but that doesn't stop them having been elsewhere, given that they were in Folkeington. Most of the industries have gone. Even the chalkpits that covered whole areas in white dust have largely been worked out and turned into landfill or abandoned. Small areas remain, or diversification has brought in new ideas. For a while, at Langrish, the nose cones for Concord were made. Next to the church at Littlington, there is a successful craft brewery, and across the downs there are many vineyards bringing drinkable wine back onto British shores. So it's a glimpse of some of the industry that was going on over the centuries in South Downs and its Weald and Northern Territories. And then you've got the industrialists coming in, bringing their money and building lots of churches, but that was a step too far in the end, because I landed up with too many notes. So very Amadeus. So thank you very much for watching, and wishing you all the very best, and hoping that your weather is kind to you in all ways, shapes and forms. And it would be lovely if you could like, subscribe, and particularly comment. And all the very best, and thank you.